Truth Caviar, the show about ideas that matter. Hosted by global thinkers Brent M. Eastwood and Vadim Bichutsky. Welcome in, everybody. Hope y'all are having a great week. This is the Truth Caviar show. I am Vadim Bichutsky, and I'm here with my partner in crime, Brent M. Eastwood. Today, we're talking all about the victimhood narratives and mentality that, in recent years, has overtaken traditional American ideals of personal responsibility, merit, and excellence. Victimhood is America's currency of the day. There are fake victims everywhere, from Jussie Smollett to Naomi Osaka to Rachel Dolezal to Michelle Obama to Stacey Abrams. Victimhood is the fastest path to garner sympathy and to use that sympathy to greater money and influence in America today. There's a difference between victimhood and hardship. Everyone encounters hardship, but one chooses to be a victim. It didn't used to be this way. America used to be a nation of underdogs. The founding fathers rose up in an insurgency against the British Empire, declared independence, and have given us the greatest country in the history of the world. But as we've become prosperous, we've become a nation of incompetence. Prosperity affords us the opportunity to focus on imaginary bigotry and wokeness instead of what really matters, preserving this republic and making a better life for our children and grandchildren. Underdogs strive for excellence. Victims blame and scapegoat others. Incumbency breeds victimhood. Victimhood breeds mediocrity, incompetence, reduction of the economic pie, and national decline. Victimhood is a tool used by elites to avoid accountability. Virtue is replaced by virtue signaling. All empires eventually fall. Some are defeated by foreign enemies, some are debased by domestic greed and power. As Vivek Ramaswamy, in his book, Nation of Victims, describes, at the core of our problem today is a hunger for meaning and purpose. As religion, patriotism, and local groups have withered, wokeness and identity politics have arisen up to replace them. Our society is corrupted by Orwellian use of language, used by the ruling class to gaslight us. Conformity is diversity. Inequality is equity. Racism is anti-racism. Exclusion is inclusion. These linguistic lies are used to disempower individuals and empower woke elites and totalitarians. America's victimhood tale doesn't begin last year, 10 years ago, or even 100 years ago. It begins during the Civil War, when Robert E. Lee blamed James Longstreet for the South losing the Civil War. After the Civil War, as Republicans tried to reconstruct the Union, pro-slavery Democrats and their sympathizers on the Supreme Court watered down the Reconstruction Amendments that protected citizens' rights and paved the way for judicial activism that curtailed civil rights and economic regulations. In the 1938 case, United States versus Carolyn Products, the Supreme Court, finally willing to end the legacy of slavery and ban discrimination, laid out the conditions groups had to meet for the court to scrutinize laws discriminating against such groups. 1. The group had to be politically powerless. They couldn't redress their grievances through the normal political process. 2. The group experienced discrimination historically. And 3. Membership in the group had to be based on immutable characteristics. 16 years later, in 1954, the court applied these conditions to correctly conclude that segregation was unconstitutional in the case of Brown versus the Board of Education. Since Brown, however, the Carolyn Products conditions have been abused by activists to manufacture oppressed groups in a race to the bottom. This creates a society in which every group imaginable seeks to be the bigger victim, win the oppression Olympics to redress whatever grievance they might have. A better way to fight injustice and discrimination is to decouple group identity from the perceived grievance and ask, is there a connection between group identity and the policy in dispute? If not, then the only plausible explanation for the policy is prejudice. For example, there's no connection between race and public education. There's no justification for segregation other than racism. Hence, separate but equal education was discriminatory. This new approach to equal protection jurisprudence focuses on merit, individual agency, and social mobility, and doesn't make groups compete to be bigger victims. Victimhood helps nobody in the end. Tools you use to create victims today will be used by your enemies tomorrow. There is a better way to ensure a more perfect union. We must replace grievance with greatness. Victimhood is leading us to national suicide. We need to change course and revive merit and excellence. We need a new Manhattan Project for semiconductor fabrication, educate engineers instead of activists, invest in economic growth and retraining, focusing on STEM fields and innovation, restore our manufacturing base, and rebuild our military in order to compete with China. Make the military great again instead of woke. Focus on winning wars and fighting for freedom, not Fox, white rage. Being strategic and smart with our power, know when to engage militarily and when not to. The key to overcoming victimhood and returning to excellence is to stop thinking in terms of hierarchies and power structures. Such misguided attitude simply inverts the axis of oppression, leading to more division and injustice. We need to think in terms of Kant's universalization. If it is wrong when I am the oppressed, then it is wrong when I am the oppressor. Otherwise, we end up in a broken country or even in civil war. Eschew identity politics, people exploiting their identities to obtain more power and wealth, and think in terms of a shared humanity. Prosperity leads to entitlement and laziness. Laziness breeds victimhood as people make excuses for their failures and cover up their sloth with a veneer of fighting injustice. In turn, this creates a culture of bread and circuses. Power-hungry politicians debase the currency to bribe the populace with government largesse while abdicating responsibility with distractions like identity politics, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and division. Such culture leads to inequality and national decline, as the populace, pitted against each other, fights over how to distribute the economic pie instead of growing it. The more victimhood one bestows upon themselves, the greater share of the economic pie they demand. Our national wealth has also made us more risk-averse, as people have more to lose. As the old saying goes, if you ain't got nothing, you ain't got nothing to lose. This creates a culture of fear and silencing. Good people don't speak up for fear of retribution and material loss. Consequently, good people's silence empowers ideologues who accrue more power and wealth by pushing bad and divisive policies and ideas that go unchallenged and become mainstays of society. Ultimately, this ideology-centered culture of bread and circuses destroys the country. As society based on merit, excellence, rationality, citizenship, patriotism, and virtue is replaced by a society based on nepotism, cronyism, corruption, spectacle, consumerism, instant gratification, and virtue signaling. The downward spiral of victimhood leads nowhere good, to a country where identity groups subjugate each other depending on who's in power. Victimhood breeds more victimhood as groups try to stick it to their so-called oppressors. That's not equality. That's not freedom. That's tyranny, masquerading as social justice. That's a hierarchy that destroys the country. To move forward and restore the American dream, we need to forgive, eschew grievances and identity politics, and refocus on excellence. Often, prejudice isn't something innate to people. It's born out of ignorance, fear, revenge, and the inability to see others' humanity. Sometimes we say bigoted things we don't mean because we're in a bad mood, have a bad day, angry, or tired. We must break the force field of grievance to foster a culture of equality and excellence, and return to a classically liberal society where everybody is allowed to fail, make mistakes, learn and grow from mistakes, and get a second chance. Wokeness is an antithesis of freedom. To eschew victimhood, we need to return to merit and excellence and instill the ideas of citizenship as opposed to consumerism, duty, and service in young people. But there's a paradox of meritocracy. It increases wealth inequality through inheritance and eventually leads to its own demise, as a developed aristocracy works hard to undermine equality of opportunity and preserve their wealth. Contrary to progressive solutions that tax wealth, Ramaswamy proposes a high inheritance tax as a hedge against the formation of aristocracy that sabotages merit and equality of opportunity. If you build your wealth through your own hard work, your children shouldn't be spoiled with something they didn't earn. Unlike wealth taxes, inheritance taxes don't reduce economic growth and incentives for hard work. Everybody benefits in the end. The country grows richer and more prosperous, with more people contributing to economic growth and job creation. Your children become better citizens, and people don't become lazy by simply feeding off the fruits of your hard work and not helping the country that gave them so much opportunity and freedom. Inheritance taxes prevent aristocracies and preserve the meritocratic system that benefits all, rich and poor alike. To escape the downward spiral of victimhood, we need to restore the country focused on merit, excellence, citizenship, forgiveness, classical liberal ideals, virtue, duty, and service. This will go a long way towards securing the blessings of liberty and prosperity for ourselves and our posterity, and keeping America as the greatest nation on the face of the earth.
Well, thank you for that great introduction. I'm going to touch on some things that you already mentioned. So if it gets a little repetitive, I'm sorry about that. But I think I want to really ram these points home, especially on the use of language by the left, this Orwellian doublespeak for liberals to assert control. And they're trying to make the idea opposite to legitimize it and pacify the crowds. So again, we have war is peace, diversity is conformity, equity is equality, exclusion is inclusion. All of these types of new words and doublespeak lead to a problem with a woke America. So changes in language, this can pave the way for change in normative thought. And words can then win battles over values and ideas. Equity and equality mean the same thing. And they're both vague concepts that I don't even know the difference after they've been so co-opted by the left.
That's what the left does, right? Is they understand the power of language to transform society.
Right. And I think equity means having equal numbers of races, ethnicities, and gender in a place of work or school or organization.
Brent, you asked the difference between equity and equality. Is that what you asked?
Yeah, I don't really know the difference. So I think...
I mean, equality is equality of opportunity. Mm-hmm. Equity is the equality of outcomes.
Okay, you could look at it that way. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good definition. And this leads, though, to quota systems. So you have trying to get equal number of races, ethnicities, and gender in a place of work or school. Now, to be sure, sometimes you need this. Sometimes you need this.
Let me give you an example. So the median household income for whites is X. The median household income for blacks is Y, where X is bigger than Y. Therefore, such system is inequitable, according to the left.
Okay. So that would be more unequal distribution of
they
income.
Would call it inequitable. There's no equity in such a system.
But you see how difficult this is for normal people to understand. I have a PhD, you have 2 master's degrees, and we're trying to figure out how to define this.
Correct. Obfuscation is part of their trick, right? Equity and equality, it sounds kind of like, to a layman, they might gloss over those distinctions, right? They might say, oh, yeah, he meant, equity. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, that's same as equality, when in fact it is not. So it's using language to trick the populace and to obtain more power.
Well, sometimes you do need gender equity. When I was in graduate school in political science at West Virginia University, at one point we had, let's say we had 15 faculty members in the department.
Right.
One of them was a woman. So it was 14-1. So we did have an equity problem. We didn't have enough women professors in the department.
Okay.
So we had to have a hiring effort.
Yeah, I mean,
and we decided that on our own internally.
Okay, but
they even asked feedback from the graduate students.
But let me ask you a question. So that disparity in gender faculty members, is that due to discrimination within the system, or is that due to choices? Or
I think that was a specific example. I wouldn't say that was systemic. But progressives would say that was a systemic effort to keep the genders.
They would say that. They would say that that's part of systemic inequity.
Yeah, but I think that that's a good use of equity in that specific instance. Yeah, the gender equity at that political science department, and they did. They started hiring more women.
Right.
So that I think is interesting. Now, sometimes we take this to a level where we're whitewashing and rewriting history, which is another thing the left loves to do. So that American history is all about slavery, for example, according to this 1619 project from the New York Times. And this is the belief that colonists wanted independence to preserve slavery, not because of politics or not because of freedom or not because of individualism. It was all about slavery, even though northern states didn't really even have slaves to the extent that the South did. But this ideology is valued more for the facts, less for the facts and less for the truth. This belief that racism is central to our nation's past and present. I'll give you the example of my former boss, U.S. Senator Tim Scott. He gave the rejoinder address after the State of the Union, and he said this country is not about racism. Well, he immediately got attacked by the left as being called Uncle Tim on Twitter, and that was trending. And Twitter didn't take it down for a while. They let it run.
According to the left, he's the black face of white supremacy.
And this whole idea of anti-racism means that we treat people differently based on their race. And that is not what Martin Luther King said.
The idea of anti-racism comes from Ibram X. Kendi, who says the only remedy to past discrimination is future discrimination.
Yeah, let's talk about merit and excellence and being an underdog. So the movie King Richard's that talks about Venus and Serena Williams playing tennis, overcoming long odds, working amazingly hard to become world beaters. We love underdogs. And self-identifying is sometimes important in this respect. Personal stories of overcoming adversity are significant and sometimes all about the American ethos, but we've taken this to a different level that is wrong. We are a nation of underdogs, this thinking goes. And underdog feeling motivates people for excellence. We like that. But then there's victim stories. So we're having a problem between underdogs and victims. So victim stories are all over the media and popular culture. You have the Jussie Smollett story, which he made up his assault from MAGA people, from people who are pro-Trump. And why did he do that? Well, he wanted to become more famous, I guess, and get attention for his career. It's really odd why he decided to do that.
Who is this?
Jussie Smollett.
Oh, Jussie Smollett. Right.
Yeah. So victimhood is a status symbol.
Correct. It's basically like, I'm a victim, so pay me more. Right? That was his whole play.
Oh, yeah. He wanted more money. Okay. I forgot about that. He was a low-paid actor. So this distinction.
I'm not sure if he was underpaid or low paid, but he definitely wanted more. He wanted to use the victim card as a means to negotiating a higher salary.
Yeah. And he probably thought in his head he was an underdog. So that was something that he could do. So we're having this problem in our language between underdogs and being victims. And we need to watch out for those different
Let me read this quote
distinctions.
Let me read this quote from Vivek Ramaswamy's book, Nation of Victims. Quote, "The mindset of victimhood makes you look for an enemy to punish. The mindset of an underdog makes you look for which parts of the world you can change." Unquote.
That's a good one. And then we have this idea of overcoming hardship. Well, everybody has to overcome hardship. And sometimes this is because of fate or luck and not because other people are keeping you down. That's an important distinction. So destiny is to overcome hardship, and underdogs prove people wrong. They don't ask for sympathy as a victim. There's a difference there. And then we look, you mentioned income inequality and low income people and distribution of wealth. Well, let's take a look at our people who are low income and poverty and put it into perspective compared to other cultures and other countries. Yes, we do have low income people. Yes, there are people who are not able to own their own transportation to get to work. Education is worse in low-income neighborhoods because they pay lesser property taxes. So we have some problems with inequality. That's true. But if you look at some low-income people, they have their own homes. They have air conditioning, cable, large TVs, streaming services, smartphones, laptops. I've been to homeless shelters where there are people with smartphones at the homeless shelter and laptops. And Vivek says 43% of our poor own 2 or more cars in the United States. So most have enough to eat. We have food banks. Those are important, especially during COVID when people were all of a sudden unemployed and couldn't get to the store, couldn't afford it. But we also have government programs like food stamps, SNAP, and TANF, temporary assistance to needy families. And there's unemployment insurance that got extended, and student loan forgiveness, and charities and churches that speak up for the poor and help the poor. So you could argue that Americans are better off than in other developing countries, even though they're low income. So the progressives still want to redistribute wealth and pursue socialism for equity and equality. And that's where this victimhood comes up.
Well, it's about creating equal outcomes, right? So you have more than me. Therefore, we're going to take from you and give it to me to create equality of outcomes. And that sounds good in theory, but in practice, what ends up happening is that everybody has equality of crap. That's communism.
Let's go back to the tennis example with Serena Williams and Venus Williams. Okay, so pursuit of excellence, overcoming odds to promote merit and excellence instead of victimhood. We have another she's a current professional tennis player named Naomi Osaka. And this story, I'm not going to get too much into the whole story of Naomi Osaka, but she is playing a victim, an opposite of the Williams sisters. She was playing a match, and the example was that somebody said, "Hey, Naomi, you suck."
Somebody heckled her, like, "You suck," like just random fan.
Athletes get heckled all the time. When I played college baseball, I got heckled. I was an outfielder, and people sitting in the stands would say, "Hey, you suck. Your team sucks." You know. Well, I guess what Naomi Osaka did is she went to the umpire, grabbed the microphone, and said, "Please don't talk to me like that."
Yeah.
And it's like, you should have, as a professional athlete, that shouldn't even faze you.
And guess what? What happened was, I'm not sure if Vivek talks about that in the book, but afterwards, she wouldn't even talk to the media.
Yeah, she can't give a press conference.
Yeah, because she was like, it affected my mental health. I can't talk to you guys.
And she withdrew from tournaments. I mean, it's laughable. And the media just eats this up. They love this.
Wait, is she American or is she Japanese?
She's Japanese-American.
She's Japanese. Yeah, but she competes for the U.S., right?
Yeah, I think she has 2 passports. I think she was born in Japan to American parents in the military. I think.
Okay, but she's American.
Yeah, she's American. Okay. Japanese-American. Yeah. And then they have people taking the identity of other races. So we know we have Senator Elizabeth Warren. You know the story about how she said she's Native American, and she used her career as identifying and classifying herself as a Native American. She promoted herself.
I mean, she got tenure.
She got promoted and tenure based on being a minority.
Yeah. She prevented a real minority from getting jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
And she pushed back on it, you know. Now, I've got some Native American blood in me. I think about 1/16th Cherokee, 1/32nd, you know, and I don't use that, of course. I'm a white, non-Hispanic male, as the census would say, Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So if I would go around saying and not to put too fine a point on it, but there is a way that you can identify and become a member of the Cherokee Nation if you can go back and show that you have birth certificates from that. You can join the nation, but that's not what Elizabeth Warren did.
Right.
She never officially joined the nation.
Right.
You know, and I could, but I choose not to. And so I don't want to play that type of card. Now, my son happens to be half Hispanic. So he's
a white Hispanic.
So he's a white Hispanic. But you see how this race thing gets confusing.
Well, it's not just confusing. It's just ridiculous. It's like, instead of focusing on an individual, on their God-given talents, on how hard they work, you know, what kind of individual they are, it's all about what gender is he, what race Is he like all of these immutable characteristics that have nothing to do with individuals?
And then you get in trouble. Harvard University got in trouble because they were not admitting Asian Americans to the point that they had deserved the merit that they exhibited during high school.
They discriminated.
Yeah, so they had quotas and discriminated.
And whites.
Yeah. Are they victims too? I mean, Asian Americans that don't get into Harvard, is that victimhood? I don't know.
So, Brent, you mentioned luck.
And fate.
Yeah, and fate, right. I just want to read this quote again from Vivek's book. Quote, an underdog story offers the hope that you can do anything, that no matter your lot in life, your fate is ultimately in your hands.
Yes.
That it's only a question of how hard you work and how long you have to wait for preparation to meet opportunity. In contrast, although the victim starts in the same destitute position as the underdog, their story is all about what they can't do. The odds are too great, the enemy's too strong, the circumstances too unjust for the happy ending to be achieved by the hero's own power. The only way to reach a successful resolution is for the victimizers to eventually make recompense to the victim by helping them reach the finish line. The underdog's task is to overcome others' doubt by proving them wrong with what they can do. But the victim's task is to overcome their doubt by persuading them to recognize them as a victim, unquote.
We used to have in this country a admiration and a hero worship almost for people who started out with nothing, maybe came here first generation in this country with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and that upward mobility, getting rich is glorious, the Horatio Alger story of Americans who come here penniless and they end up becoming wealthy, and that social upward mobility because of hard work and because of a pursuit of excellence and not this victimhood.
So Brent, I can tell you from my personal experience, right? Mm-hmm. Like if somebody comes to me and says, hey man, I'm trying to do X, can you help me? Right? Like, so I can see some initiative in them, right? Like, I'm trying to accomplish whatever goal it is, I'm trying to make a startup, or I'm trying to find a job, or I'm trying to, here's what I've done. Here's why I'm seeking assistance. But it's their initiative, right? They're coming up to me not as a victim, but as somebody who's somebody who sees their own agency in their own hands. Whereas if somebody in the exact same position comes to me and starts, well, I'm a victim because I'm a woman, or because, I'm too fat, or, I'm too skinny, or, because I came from a poor family, I probably still would help them again, but it's just not the same. It's like, man, I get it. I'm an immigrant. I come from poor family myself, but when you kind of present yourself that victimhood is all you have, that makes me less likely to help them, kind of paradoxically, as opposed to if somebody says, hey man, I'm trying to make it. I need some advice. I need some help. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm more likely to help the underdog than the victim.
And we're getting away from people becoming very successful and wealthy, and this, what I call economic social mobility upwards. So pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and doing a lot of individualism as we've had in the past. And so we don't have the same types of heroes anymore. We don't have Ayn Rand's characters.
Yes.
In Atlas Shrugged, for example.
We don't really have heroes anymore. We don't really have somebody who's like, oh my God, he rose from, the media doesn't promote those people. Look, he came on the boat with freaking nothing. And look, he built an empire, over the course of 20 years or whatever. I want to hear, that's what inspiring to me. That's why I read books, because I want to learn. I'm fascinated. That's why I love biographies, because I'm fascinated by, what insight did he have? How did he do it? What made him tick? What did he see that others didn't? Mm-hmm. I don't know how when you always wallow in victimhood, how do you live with yourself? Like if you wake up and all you see in the mirror is like, oh, I can't make it. Oh man, there's my neighbor is a racist, and my coworker is a racist, and I didn't get this job because I'm a woman, or whatever. It's like that must be so draining to just like wake up every morning
and depressed.
Depressed, exactly. That's right. Mental illness, right? Like depression and sets in, and you're like. But if you say, okay, I'm going to do a little bit every day and I'm going to get better and I'm going to build this. And eventually, like Vivek says, eventually hard work will meet opportunity.
Elon Musk is a good example of this. Growing up in South Africa, he was part of a system where he felt that he was extremely picked on over the years and he wanted a better life. And he had an opportunity with part of his mom's family was from Canada. So he was able to get a Canadian passport and a visa into Canada. And he left South Africa with the clothes on his back and money for calling one relative. Maybe he had two relatives in Canada, and they weren't even able to help him that much. But he was able to go to university in Canada. And then he switched over to the University of Pennsylvania on a student visa. And the rest is history. And do we celebrate this with economic upward mobility? Even in China, even in communist China, getting rich is glorious, as Deng Xiaoping said.
They're not celebrating him now because he's under investigation.
Yeah, of course. But this upward mobility has lost its value. Progressives want everybody to be low income and drag everybody down.
Because independent-minded people aren't for them, right? Independent-minded people generally don't vote Democrat, and they're hard to control. If you have your own business, that's what Victor Davis Hanson talks about that.
Sure.
A self-made man is harder to control than, somebody who's on the dole.
Yeah, and I think the author found out the hard way. You have to be careful with race in the United States. He gives that example where in the book, he went to his uncle's house and the uncle's neighbor was mowing so that grass clippings got on the driveway of the uncle's house from the neighbor's lawnmower. And so Vivek was like, oh, I'm going to short circuit this situation and talk to the guy who is mowing and ask him, hey, can you mow in a way that doesn't put the grass clippings on my uncle's driveway? You're making a mess. You could easily remedy this. And I think that was a mistake. I don't think he should have gotten involved because it's not his house. But he thought it was his purpose to do that. And then he said something that was really bad. The neighbor happened to be African American. He said, I don't want to have to get a third party involved. And the African American thought, oh, you're going to call the cops on me. And so there's this racist exchange. And I would argue it would have been better to stay out of that whole thing.
I mean, he wanted to help his aunt. I mean, yeah, because if somebody throws trash on your,
it was just grass clippings though.
Well, I mean, but still, right? Like you shouldn't dirty up somebody's driveway, right? Like, I mean, you should be wise enough. And he wasn't like, he was asking politely, like he wasn't like making a huge deal out of it,
But he said, if we need to get a third party involved, we will. And the African-American guy was like, he's going to call the cops on me for a lawnmower. He only said
that because he put a hand to his face. He went like that.
Oh, well. Yeah. I think, and Vivek, the author, admits that this was a mistake. I don't think he should have got involved. But
what did he say in the book? He said it was a mistake. He probably should not have said third party. He probably should have, like, at the point when, he put a hand to his face, he probably should have let it go.
Yeah.
But I think.
But the wife apologized later. I think there was admission of both sides being on the wrong. The wife apologized to the aunt and uncle, didn't they?
The guy who was mowing, his wife apologized.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Right. His wife apologized.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so both parties were.
Yeah. But Brent, I think the third party, getting third party involved, I think that's like the lawyer in Vivek. Mm-hmm. We get an arbitrator.
Oh, yeah, the arbitrator. But it was two minorities kind of going at it, That was kind of the interesting point.
Right.
Because Vivek is a person of color, and the other guy was a person of color.
Correct. Vivek is Indian American.
Yes, or Asian American. Yeah.
He was born in the U.S. His parents are immigrants from India.
Correct. But this whole thing is dividing races into oppressors and victims.
Right.
That's what we're talking about. He felt victimized.
Yeah.
The lawnmower felt victimized.
Oh, yeah. What set Vivek off is that he said something like, hey, man, your skin is 3 shades lighter than mine.
Right.
So he brought skin color into the conversation, not Vivek.
Correct. That is true. And that was why some people were like, you shouldn't put this in the book. He's like, no, this is an illustrated point of race in America. Let's put this in the book. It's about the powerful controlling the weak. And that's what the critical race theory people, they say that Vivek was powerful and controlling a weak person. And that's not really true. It was just something.
The critical race theorists, their trick is basically to exploit race to get out of any situation or to deflect blame. That's what critical race theory is all about. It's to exploit past injustices as a way of avoiding accountability in the present.
That's a very good distinction. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I have trouble with these liberal buzz phrases like systemic racism. I'm a social scientist, but I don't really understand what systemic racism means. And I've used it myself, not fully understanding what systemic racism is, but I used it in a class that I was teaching. I don't know.
It basically
does that mean everything
systemic
in the United
racism basically is anything that the left doesn't like. That's what it is. I mean, it's that cynical, right? It's meant to kind of deflect blame, scapegoat others, avoid accountability for my own behavior.
Yes.
That's really what it's all about.
So everything in the United States is racist.
Right. So
all the institutions.
Okay, so Brent, we are on this podcast, and we're both white guys. So by definition, our podcast is systemically racist.
Yeah, because we don't have guests.
Yeah.
So if we had guests, we would have to have 13% African Americans, 25%
we don't have guests.
Hispanic.
Yeah.
But we'd have to have equity in our guests.
Yeah. So it's like
we're racist if we don't.
Let's say next week let's say we invite Mitch McConnell to be on our podcast next week. Mm-hmm. Well, he's a white guy, and
he oppresses. He's a Republican.
Well, our podcast is systemically racist because we didn't have a minority as a guest.
So that means all our institutions, business, schools, government, entertainment, courts.
Our podcast is inequitable, right?
Yeah.
Unequal outcomes.
And then the funny thing is that the institutions that I just talked about, many are controlled by the left anyway.
Well, exactly. I mean,
they're controlling it already.
It's a trick. It's a cynical trick so you have to understand about the left, right? And Heather McDonald at the Manhattan Institute, she makes this point perfectly.
Okay.
So the whole idea of the left, right, is behavior doesn't matter. If a black guy throws a hot cup of coffee in your face and you get burned, right? Systemic racism made him do it, not his behavior, not because he's a bad guy, right?
And this leads into a crime, what we talked about with crime.
Yes. So it goes back to what I said. The terms like systemic racism, equity, these are just buzzwords meant to make excuses for bad behavior.
If we're making racist policies, it's going to lead to racist outcomes anyway. So it's going to lead to more racism.
And I'm not for this, but for every action, there's an opposite reaction, an equal and opposite reaction. So these so-called victims, they keep punching you in the face and pretending to be marginalized. Hey, I'm marginalized. Even though I control big tech, big media, big government, big Hollywood. I control everything, but I'm still marginalized.
Let's move on from race and talk about political philosophy. Now, we've been talking about the progressive view of victimhood, but it's also on the right, too. Conservatives become victims as well. And you can use the example of the 2020 election that Trump and his supporters say were stolen from him. I don't agree with that sentiment. I think that there were 62 lawsuits, I believe, and 61 were lost, some from judges that were Republican. So conservatives, too, say they're the victims of a stolen election and victims of being in the minority in certain types of institutions. But on the other hand, if you look at election stealing, it comes from the left, too. Stacey Abrams. Yep. Who ran for governor?
Hillary Clinton.
And then Stacey Abrams in 2018, after losing the Georgia governor's race, claiming false voter suppression from Secretary of State Brian Kemp. None of that is true.
Democrats have objected to every election, to every presidential election since 2000. The Republicans
that they lost. Yeah.
So. Yeah.
And then you have Dinesh D'Souza with 2,000 Mules. I didn't happen to see that movie.
I didn't see it either.
It's all about operatives.
He has a book coming out on it.
Okay, so they're left-wing operatives as the premise goes, I from what I understand, illegally carried ballots from nonprofits to these drop boxes.
Yeah, and
we have a drop box, by the way, in Arlington County near us.
Yeah.
Yeah, you walk past it. There's a drop box.
Okay.
Yeah, and so the nonprofits are harvesting ballots and stuffing them into these drop boxes.
I think that's true. Whether that's illegal,
right.
I'm not a lawyer. I can't really answer that, but I think there's some truth in that. So the way I would say 2020 was probably not stolen in a traditional sense. When we think of a stolen election, we think of like, switching ballots, right? Or removing ballots like, this ballot is for my opponent, I'm going to throw this away, right? Or incorrectly counting ballots. That's what we like traditionally associate with stolen election. But 2020 election was definitely, I would say, rigged, and in the sense that every major institution came out hard against Trump. Whether they had a right to do it, I mean, I guess they didn't do anything illegal technically. But that's where I think where the election was rigged, is that every institution suppressed Republicans and uplifted Democrats.
Well, we have a history of all of our elections being somewhat having shenanigans. It used to be both sides were guilty of this, but Democrats, I would argue, did it more. Poll hauling. Poor people. So you give them rides to the polls.
Oh, okay.
Busing, poll hauling. The Democrats used to be known for doing that.
Is that legal? That's debatable.
It's a shenanigan.
Right?
It's debatable.
You can pay somebody, right? For
Are they getting food when they get these rides? Are they getting coupons?
I actually saw in 2012. I saw Democrats like giving out water. There were some snacks to people at the polls.
Oh yeah.
So that was questionable. I remember.
The Democrats are the good guys, and we don't care about people.
So I actually asked one of them, like, "Who do you work for?" And she said she was a federal government employee.
Oh yeah.
That's probably illegal for a federal government employee to do that.
Yeah, because of the Hatch Act.
But that's, they look the other way, right? Like, laws don't apply to Democrats, right? Like,
I think everybody in America can find times that they were victims. I can give you an example back again when I was in graduate school, and I was going to school right after I got out of the Army. So it was from 2003 to 2005. And if you remember, that was when the Iraq War was going on.
Right.
So all the professors and all the grad students were against the war. That's their choice.
Right.
I was supporting the war because I'm patriotic. I also trained people. My friends were fighting. I was out of the military.
Right.
So these people, the professors and the graduate students, blamed me. I was the punching bag and being blamed for...
You were the problem.
You were the problem. And they started spreading this rumor that I was funded by Karl Rove and Donald Rumsfeld. And that was not true. And then I also had a professor who called me into his office and wanted me to personally apologize to him for Abu Ghraib.
Oh,
that's
wow.
a true story.
Wow.
He called me in and he showed me the New York Times article and he said, "You need to apologize for this."
Well, simply because you supported the war?
Simply because I was in the Army and I supported the war. Yeah. And I didn't do it.
Yeah. Well, of course you didn't do it. I know that.
Yeah.
That's not very liberal, liberal in the traditional sense, right? Like liberals don't impugn people for the positions that they hold, right? Like you can disagree with me, but you can't impugn bad motives on my part just because I hold that position. Well, so Brent, where I would question, and I think that's where you sort of kind of maybe linguistic terminology that you used. You kind of used the Bush-Cheney terminology. You said you supported the war because you were patriotic.
Yeah.
Are you saying the people who weren't for the war are unpatriotic?
No, because my being blamed, though, that's the part that I didn't like.
Right.
The war is my fault. I didn't design the war. I was a very low-level lieutenant, so I had no policy making.
You were a rank and file member,
right?
Like you were told what to do.
But a lot of the people who supported the war supported it before it started. I mean, it was difficult.
Obviously, supported the war
in 2004 or 2006. There's a lot of. And in hindsight, I could probably say, but as a former military member who had friends and people who I trained who were fighting and putting them in harm's way, I felt I should support the war because it was a patriotic endeavor to do so.
You were basically supporting your brothers and sisters in battle.
That's right.
I get it. Yep.
And now Was I a victim, a conservative victim from this type of treatment? No, I said, I don't care. I am still going to graduate with my PhD no matter what these people say.
I would say that,
and I did.
I would say that was definitely unfair. That was unfair for them to, to accuse you of being the bad guy, even though you had no policy authority.
Now, I did make an action on that experience. I did say I am not going to be a tenure track professor.
Oh, you said that?
Yeah, that was my decision. I didn't tell him that.
Okay.
But I decided to move to DC and pursue my fame and fortune doing not being a tenure track professor.
Okay.
I'm a part-time professor now.
Right.
I've always been a part-time professor.
Right.
But I didn't want to pursue tenure track because I thought that I would be discriminated against because I was a conservative. So I was a victim in some way.
So you were a victim. So yeah. I think you have a legitimate...
Yeah. I changed my career orientation because of the way I was treated in graduate school.
Opportunities were denied to you because of your political beliefs.
I believe that.
Yeah. I believe so. So too. Now, strictly speaking, you might have gotten a tenure track job somewhere, but it probably would have been hard. If you were a hardcore liberal, a hardcore leftist, you probably would have gotten you probably had multiple offers,
sure.
And you probably, honestly, it would have been hard for you. It would have to be like a really special situation, maybe like at some Christian college or, or something like that.
And there's not many of those.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah. Definitely. I mean, there's definitely a double standard in academia. Actually, there's a double standard in every major institution nowadays. Right? So
if you're an actor in Hollywood.
Well, Ben Shapiro's book, Primetime Propaganda, talks about the blacklists. And liberals are very stealthy. They're passive aggressive. They're like, they sort of smile in your face and pretend like they're on your side, but then they stab you in the back when you're not looking. See,
Obama was like that.
Well, I think a lot of liberals are like that. See, they pretend that they're like, oh, we're just hippies, we're just soft-spoken. They're not bombastic like Trump, right?
Right. Okay, speaking of Trump, let's talk about Trump. Is he a victim?
I think in certain sense he is.
In certain circumstances,
because
I agree.
The deep state sabotaged his presidency. The election was rigged, and I explained, in what way. It was definitely rigged. It was maybe the term rigged is maybe the wrong term. I would say it was definitely unfair the way the election was conducted towards Trump.
He was victimized in that first impeachment. That first impeachment was bogus for a phone call to Ukraine.
Yes.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
So I was against that.
Even second impeachment.
That one, and we've had this discussion before, that one I did support the impeachment. I think he incited the insurrection. But that's my opinion.
Well, I mean, you're entitled to your opinion. I disagree. Let me put it to you this way, Brent. If a Democrat gave that exact same speech with the exact same results, nothing would have happened. So that's my argument.
Okay. Well, I think he is victimized during this last search and seizure.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a victim of an unreasonable search and seizure at his own home at Mar-a-Lago.
Correct.
So I think sometimes he's a victim, sometimes he's not.
Yeah. And I would call the Capitol, whatever happened at the Capitol, as a riot, not an insurrection.
Okay, that's semantics. But
but it's important because
it is important because it's a different degree.
Because I don't want to use the language of the left. I'm very careful now. It's like, I mean, unless it's deserving, right? But it's like whatever the term left, wants to use in a certain situation, because it's so much like it's kind of pushed upon you by the media, by the newspapers, by Hollywood, by the popular culture. But so that's why I'm kind of careful. As far as, it was definitely a riot and it was a horrible thing, but it wasn't an insurrection.
Another example of political victimhood, and I agree with this one, is that white male, high school educated, unemployed people, men, losing their manufacturing jobs because of the way we had our economy set up and the way we have trade policy set up. So white male, high school educated, unemployed.
And we talked about that on the China.
I think those guys are victims, political victims. I think they're political and economic victims.
Well, essentially, our ruling class sold us out. Not us out. I'm not part of that. I've never worked in manufacturing, but basically, the ruling class sold out blue collar jobs for finance. right? Like, so we basically degraded the blue collar sector in order to prop up the finance and the value of the dollar.
And Trump addressed that, and he was able to speak to that, and very effectively. And Rick Santorum started that whole, the blue collar.
We should probably talk about his book.
We should.
Blue Collar Conservatives, but because Trump credits that book as like opening his eyes, helping him to formulate his 2016 agenda.
Yeah. Now, during the Obama years, I felt like I didn't have a political voice. I mean, there was Twitter. This was, 2010, 2011.
I can tell you right now.
I could go to CPAC. I'd go to CPAC every year.
So it wasn't so much, like I can tell you in 2016, it wasn't so much that I was pro-Trump, although I didn't really have problems, okay. I mean, I didn't really have any kind of beefs with him. It wasn't so much I was happy on 2016. I was just happy that the left lost, like just personally. I was just like,
well, we were both in DC at the time, and we met. We met right after the election.
No, we met before the election. We met.
No. But I mean, we personally talked the day after the election.
Exactly.
And it was like somebody died in DC. It was like everybody was in mourning.
I remember
that was awesome.
I remember walking out the day after the 2016 election. And there's like a pep in my step, and I was smiling, and I saw these liberals like walking like ghosts, like and in my view, there's nothing better than like than upset leftists.
Yeah.
So
and then
it's like
at the coffee shop that we met at the day after the election, there were other people in the coffee shop, and they were just down. They were talking to their friends, and they were emoting and crying.
Can you believe this? What happened? He stole the election. There's that term stolen again.
Now, Vivek, our author, he takes this to another step. Now, he starts talking about comparing, and you talked about this in your intro segment, the United States is Rome, and that we're on a decline because of all this, and that our economy is not diverse.
I mean, we're definitely in decline, I would argue.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard one. I don't agree with the Rome. I think that's kind of low hanging fruit, and I don't like the Rome analogy.
Brent, I think to be fair, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he says that we're like Rome. I think he's making the historical analogy that actually Rome sort of had ups and downs. There were multiple declines in there were peaks and valleys to Rome, and that. But I mean, it did eventually fall. But the point is, like, even though, and I also heard this, I also heard interviews where Vivek mentioned this. So his point isn't necessarily that we're like Rome. His point is that even though we're on a decline, if we right this ship, we could still be the global superpower for hundreds of years.
Yeah, and I would argue
that's his point.
We have great technology. We have a great military. We have an abundance of energy. We have a very good geographical location because we're separated by two oceans. Drugs and crime, bad. We've talked about that. But I don't think we're going to lose the republic because of drugs and crime. Maybe, I don't know. It's kind of the myth of the American decline.
Look. Everything stems from. It's the economy, stupid, right? Everything stems from the economic.
And inflation is a killer, but it's killing every country.
And we talked about this before on previous episodes, right? We have two Americas, right? We have the ruling class and everybody else, right? And so you can't have this much gap between people who make all the decisions and the regular people.
Then we get into oligarchy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's really you can't have an overclass that has nothing in common with the common man. And so that's what's leading to so many negative downstream effects, like, opioids and loss of jobs and, breakdown of the family. All of that stems from the loss of jobs, from the fact that, we have two Americas. The overclass doesn't really address the concerns of the everyday citizen.
Are we headed to a civil war?
I hope not. But if it continues, if we continue to see unequal application of the law, if we have
that's part of it. Two judicial systems.
Yeah, two systems of justice, then it's I hope cooler heads prevail.
I don't think there's going to be armed rebellion. I think that's overstated. I don't think there's going to be a civil war. But if you talk to some people, Vivek talked. I don't have the figures of those surveys and polling that he polled.
Yeah, I don't have.
But it was mainly young people who said that we were going to have a civil war in this country. But I can tell you this anecdotally.
But I think this is something that isn't said. But coming back to January 6th and the riot, right? I think. And again, I think what they did was wrong, but they saw what happened in 2020, and they saw how Trump was suppressed and how their jobs were, how the ruling class didn't care about their jobs, and they were trying to take down the president, who they felt, rightly or wrongly, was for them, right? Mm-hmm. Was fighting for them. So you could argue that was kind of like a mini, that was like a signal that something. That people are very unhappy. And so my argument is that we have to ask, just like what Tucker says, we have to ask, why did Trump win in 2016? We have to ask the question, why did the people feel like they needed to riot on January 6th?
Mm-hmm. Now, I can tell you anecdotally, I teach a class in counterterrorism, terrorism, and I don't have a lot of students, but I have mostly my students are in their 20s, and they're more interested in domestic terrorism than they are in foreign terrorism.
Yeah.
They want to do Proud Boys and they want to do 3%ers.
Yeah, I think they're brainwashed.
But we've always had
by the popular culture.
We've always had Ku Klux Klan. We've always had neo-Nazis. We've always had skinheads. Remember when the skinheads were a big deal? Yeah. So we've always had these elements of society. Timothy McVeigh, but my students are really fascinated. So that's because of the media.
Yeah, because of the media.
Yeah,
it's like they're brainwashed.
And the Biden administration is domestic terrorism is a big deal.
Right. It's funny. They don't talk about Antifa and they don't talk about BLM, right?
Yeah.
They only talk about supposedly right-wing groups.
And I try to get them to balance that. They don't want to.
Did they use the terms white supremacy too?
I'll find out. I've got final papers coming in next week, and I'll see if they start talking about that.
Okay.
But this victimhood. Oh, let's talk about laziness.
Yes.
Laziness.
That's important. Yes.
Okay. So this is a trend, and it's on social media. And there's people who say on social media they're opting for the soft life. Do you know about the soft life movement? There's a non-working movement. And then there's this soft life. Soft life means that you're not going to be in the rat race. You're going to maybe do odd jobs and side hustles. Maybe not work at all.
Gig economy, is that kind of related?
Yeah, but it's not even working hard through the gig economy or not even hustling.
Okay.
It's this soft life where, as opposed to a hard life where you're working and you're not getting ahead. This is not working.
Okay, not working.
And this is like taking a lot of vacations and travel.
Okay, how do you make money?
Low stress.
How do you afford all that? Then?
That's not clear from this movement. Okay, but it's called a soft life. You can look that up.
Soft life. Okay,
soft life.
Vivek doesn't talk about
that.
Yeah,
he talks about laziness.
Right.
This non-working universal basic income kind of laziness.
Well, I think it's related to universal basic income. The idea is the state will compensate me for my leisure. The state will pay me enough to live on, to pay my basic bills, and then I'll just pick up side gigs for my leisure.
Yes,
to travel and. Although that gets expensive, man.
Yeah. When you couple victimhood with laziness, then you have a decline problem.
Correct.
Then we're going to have problems with.
Well, one leads to the other.
One leads to the other.
Yeah.
But there's so many great jobs out there. Go to Starbucks or go to Chipotle and read. They'll say we're looking for workers. Read all those benefits.
Okay.
There are more benefits than I get. They get tuition assistance, they get 401k, they get for working full time at Chipotle. You can do really well. You can become a manager. These are jobs that are out there. So when we have people who are saying we don't want to work, and a lot of this because of COVID and because of jobless benefits were extended for up to 52 weeks or more.
Yeah.
And,
was it 52 weeks?
Well, we'd have to look that up.
52 weeks is like a year.
Yeah.
It's a year, exactly.
The feds would extend unemployment, and then the states would extend unemployment.
Okay. Yeah.
And so
I know I know Biden raised it and also extended it, right?
And with the stimulus checks, stimulus checks plus unemployment benefits.
And you also
could sit there and student loans cancellation. You can sit there and say, hey, I can save enough from the government's government largesse and be lazy and have the soft life,
Right.
and not have the hard life.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So laziness is a big problem.
Bread and circuses.
But this anti-work movement, forgiveness of student debt, all of these government programs, and you can also say that this has led to inflation because too much money in the money supply. And that's what we talked about during our entire. You should check out our episode on inflation if you want to understand this. So people have been punished. At first, they got a lot of government benefits, but then that created inflation, and now they're suffering under inflation, and they don't even understand why. But victimhood leads to inequality. That's what progressives say. The progressives will say victimhood leads to inequality, and trust us, we'll stay in power because of that. Right. But you alluded to the fact that victimhood can make you depressed. Yeah, it hurts happiness.
There's nothing like the satisfaction of accomplishments. Like, I don't really, honestly, Brent, I don't really care that much about money per se. Like, obviously I want to be rich and I want to have I want to be, I want to be glut, I want to buy a Benz. I want to do all these crazy things. But material wealth doesn't really excite me that much. I want to have, a nice apartment. I want to have, a nice car, but beyond that, I get excited by accomplishment. Oh, I did it. Oh,
yes, me too.
If you give me $1 million, okay, sure. I'll be happy. But if I make that $1 million myself, you know what I mean? Then the amount of happiness is through the roof because I did it my way. I earned it. I struggled. I took out jobs to make it. I did this, and this. That's what excites me. It's not so much the wealth, it's the path to wealth. That's what excites me. That's why people who inherit wealth are very unhappy, right? Because they didn't earn it. Right? They're because guys always say, right? If when they're chasing a pretty woman, right? Or a hot chick, they're it's not so much the sex, it's the game, right? It's the same kind of idea, right? It's not so much the money, it's getting, right? It's getting it, right? It's the game to get there. That's exciting, right? It's the ups and downs, and finally achieving, you know what I mean? The achievement.
Let's go back to victims again, because I think victims have this internal monologue that they internalize being a victim. So that creates this vicious circle where you're saying, I'm being pushed down. I can't accomplish anything because I'm a victim. And that leads to more. So it's a vicious cycle because you have that internal monologue. Right. And Vivek, he used the example of, I think there was a survey or a focus group of people. Well, let me finish it. There is students who are applying to Ivy League schools. So it's introduce yourself. Go around the room and introduce yourself. Right. Well, these students were saying they're victims. Yeah. The first thing that they say.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't say I'm a volunteer. I got good grades. They're saying they go to their personal story
and they're victims. So Brent, so this is just me personally. I have a hard time. I hate talking negatively about myself, even if I have legitimate grief, even if I have legitimate problems, which everybody does, right? But I don't like to talk that way about myself. I wasn't raised that way. My dad always, my parents never told me never, we don't want to hear you cry. We don't want to hear you.
Yeah. That used to be the way you raised kids.
Yeah. I shudder. If I have to, I don't like talking about my own negative experiences.
Sure.
And I never want to be seen as a victim that makes me uncomfortable. But I guess some people, the
personal story is so important.
It's I was bullied in school. Yeah. Okay. But I don't like talking about that.
Go to the bookstore and go to the new nonfiction section of the bookstore. We'll do it after we get out of the podcast. Yeah. And you will find personal memoirs of people who are not famous. Right. Okay, these are people who write books and talk about victimhood of their lives, about how hard their lives were, but without the meritocracy and the excellence.
Right.
So people who are not achieving,
Right.
not being very successful, are writing memoirs
Right.
about their personal lives,
Right.
about being victims.
Right.
And there are many books about that. So that shows you that publishers are going to go after those memoir books because they sell.
Yeah.
People want to read about.
I don't understand it because it's not inspiring.
It's not inspiring.
It's not inspiring. Like, yeah. I mean, I think it probably goes without saying that everybody had problems somewhere down the line. Like, no, everybody had their own issues, right?
Yeah.
Whether you came from a broken family, or maybe you were discriminated against, or whatever, right? Like, so I don't like, because I don't like talking about myself in that way. I also don't like people when they talk about it themselves. Like, imagine I go to dinner with somebody and all they talk about is like, wow, college was difficult for me because I'm a woman of color, and and everybody in the class was a white male, and and that made me that made me feel unsafe, and I would probably just like, I'm not going to be rude to that person, and I probably wait it out, but I probably will never want to talk to that person again, just because I don't want to hear that. Like, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, even though I was the only woman in the class, I got my degree, I went to work, I built a startup. Like, I want to hear stories like that, as opposed to like, this is why I didn't make it, or I don't want to hear your victimhood tale. I mean, it's okay to say that that you were in a challenging situation, but how did you overcome it? That's what I want to hear.
Go to LinkedIn. LinkedIn has become a grievance factory.
Oh yeah,
the algorithm. They changed the algorithm to talk about victimhood and people liking the victimhood stories.
Wait, they changed the algorithm?
Well, my feed has changed.
I guess. Yeah, my feed.
My feed has changed. Yeah. So they're pushing these victimhood stories to the top
because those stories get more engagement. Not necessarily that they change the algorithm.
Yeah. Okay. So they get more engagement. That means more people are talking about victimhood, and they think that's okay. LinkedIn was supposed to be about meritocracy. I thought.
Yeah, I thought so
too. You share achievements. Now we share victimhood stories.
Right.
Yeah. Where are the rewards for achieving excellence?
I want to read this quote because it's related to what we're going to talk about soon. So we're going to talk about monopolies and oligopolies. And I think this wokeness is related, because if you are a monopoly, and I was thinking about that the other day, when you are a monopoly, you have the luxury to be woke, right? Because nobody's going to displace you from your market position, right? So you have a luxury to engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Monopolies and oligopolies actually got me thinking that probably has something to do with corporate wokeness that we see. I don't know if Vivek talks about that in his Woking book. Probably not. And so, like, if you're a monopoly, you have a luxury not to focus on merit as much, right? Same thing with, like, once you're rich, you can be woke, right? If you think about how to eat tomorrow, you're probably not thinking about wokeness. But let me read this quote because it's got me thinking. If you are a manager at Google, you care more about diversity of gender identities on your engineering team than the quality of the products you build. Google's monopoly ensures that no one can compete with it on its core products, but other major companies can compete over diversity, equity, and inclusion rankings. So that's the new arena it has to focus on. If government aid is the bread that keeps us satiated, identity politics is the American circus, the Coliseum, where we compete with each other to find purpose and status.
Yeah. I mean, look at YouTube. Yeah. YouTube versus Rumble. Rumble's trying to compete.
Exactly. So if you're rich, if you're a monopoly, you can hire a chief diversity officer and throw away
because you have the money.
$300,000. So what? The status of the fact that we have a chief diversity officer is more important than the money that you waste.
Sure. Yeah. The diversity officers make a lot of money, and the consultants too, because of these Fortune 500 companies. Goldman Sachs pays their diversity offices a lot of money. You can afford to do that if you are part of a monopoly and oligopoly. I like that. I think that's true. I don't think Vivek totally connected the dots on that, but I think this podcast is connecting the dots on that. Exactly. I think we are.
Let me read this other quote too, because I think it's more. Here's the thing about the new culture of laziness in America. It's not limited to the workers. It's spread to corporations, especially those that enjoy monopolies, as many of today's big tech companies do. He goes on to say, but today, it doesn't much matter if the engineers at Google do a good or bad job at writing an incremental piece of code. It will print the same billions in monopoly profit from its search and ad businesses either way. That creates a culture where it doesn't matter if people show up to work or not, or how productive they are.
Yeah, or how good their goods and services are.
Yep.
They have that market share, and they don't have to worry about competitors. The competitors have to worry. I talked about this when I was a startup founder, the pressure on having a diverse workplace, plus growing, plus profit seeking, plus surviving is difficult for small businesses. The large businesses that have the market share can't afford to hire these diversity, equity, and inclusion folks.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me read this one more because I think it kind of ties all of this together. Victimhood fits laziness like a glove.
Yes.
Note that even when anti-work superstars like Doreen Ford explicitly defend laziness as a virtue, they have to justify it by saying indolence is an appropriate response to capitalism's exploitation. Stealing from your employers can't just be laziness or greed. It has to be part of a grand fight for justice. In the same way, when progressive politicians and activists argue that taxpayers ought to cover their student loans to avoid the charge that it's just laziness, they need a victimhood narrative like systemic racism to give them cover. A good victimhood narrative dresses up naked self-interest until it looks like nobility. It allows you to pretend to fight for others as you fight for nothing but yourself.
Sure. And I'm a victim. I'm going to quiet quit too. This whole thing of quiet quitting.
So I'm not lazy. I'm just protecting you. I'm being the good guy. Mm-hmm. So this veneer of fighting injustice, right? Victimhood, laziness, and victimhood is used as this veneer.
Sure.
I'm fighting capitalism. I'm not going to show up to work and I'm going to fight capitalism. I'm fighting for marginalized groups.
And universal basic income.
I'm fighting against exploitation of marginalized groups.
Well, we have gone way over an hour.
It pays me not to show up to work, right?
Yeah, the laziness problem is a big one. If we're going to have a meritocracy in capitalism, we have to have high achievement. We don't have high achievement, and it starts in education, K through 12. If you're looking at the way the education policy is in the public schools, mathematics is racist.
Right.
You're successful at math because you are white. And African Americans are victims, so they can't succeed in math. And so these types of things are coming up through K through 12. But that's education. That's different. Well, we've gone way over an hour. Hopefully you've heard some things in this podcast that you're interested in. Check out the book and think about the ways that you maybe market yourself or think about yourself. Are you a person who believes in excellence of achievement, or are you a person who believes in victimhood? Because that can lead to depression. If you think you're the victim and you're gonna blame other people for your problems, you're going to be angry. Angry turns inward, and then you have depression. So you're going to have some difficulties.
Imagine you're living in the greatest country on the earth, with so much opportunity, and all you can do is wallop in victimhood. I mean, that's the antithesis of what this country is all about.
Correct. All right. Well, we'll wrap it up at that point, but we are trying to tie together a lot of these themes, especially before the election. Maybe you'll vote on some of these themes. Yep. We don't know. Do your own research and think about the ways that you can overcome victimhood and not be a nation.
Be a victor.
And be a victor. I like that. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the Truth Caviar Show. Email us at truthcaviarshow@gmail.com and let us know what you think about the show. And remember, no bias, no bull, no fear, just hard truths.